Hello, everyone. Anyway, once I heard the news and the hilarious reactions to the news that was revealed in a leak of a draft ruling leak that Roe versus Wade just might end up being overturned, I had to make this video just once I became had the time to make videos once again. So Roe versus Wade, it's not technically been overturned just yet, but unless the mobs at the Supreme Court justices' houses are able to intimidate one of them into changing their vote, or unless something happens to, say, Clarence Thomas, he has an accident like Scalia did, it probably is going to go bye-bye. But, contrary to all the fear porn the Democrats are trying to peddle, it probably won't mean that abortion gets banned federally, but it's going to return back to the states. So those of you freaking out, hey, as hilarious as I find your freakouts, for your own sake, you might want to take a chill pill. But interestingly enough, many of these same Democrats who are fear mongering about this, they like to point out a flawed statistic, that 70% of Americans support keeping abortion legal, but, the problems with that statistic are best left for another video, mainly the fact that they don't differentiate to exactly what level they want it to be legal. Bigger distinction than you might think. Anyway, it is true that abortion's probably going to be banned in states like Texas and Oklahoma, but there's also some states like my state of California, which are going to be abortion sanctuary states, which I'm not exactly thrilled about, as you can imagine. But the vast majority of states will probably be more like European countries where abortion is generally legal the first trimester and maybe a little bit early into the second trimester, but restricted or banned past that point. And yes, believe it or not, that is the legal status of abortion in most of Western Europe. And I was quite surprised to find that out. I thought those countries would be much closer, in terms of legal status to my state of California, which is basically kind of reminds me of ancient Babylon, where they used to sacrifice children. Anyway, Roe versus Wade is bar none one of the worst rulings in Supreme Court history. It really stretched the 14th Amendment above and beyond what was originally intended, to the point where even Ruth Bader Ginsburg admitted that it was a flawed ruling. I mean, yes, there are privacy rights in the Constitution, obviously heavily implied ones in the Fourth Amendment. But when you're talking about something that involves you know, the killing of a human life. That's a little different than, say, talking about something like gay marriage or even even something like birth control. But anyway, I'll go into further detail about that in probably another video. But this has created an interesting situation where the left are now criticizing the Democrats for not codifying Roe into law decades ago, and as much as I disagree with legalized abortion, they do have a point. Most establishment politicians, regardless of party, couldn't care less about the abortion issue. For almost 50 years, they were just happy to sit back and let the Supreme Court just handle almost everything, maybe throwing a bone or two to their base and maybe using it to help detract from some of their shortcomings when they get into some trouble. So they wanted to reap the electoral benefits of appealing to the base while minimizing the odds of a backlash from voters that perhaps may have been on a different side of it. But granted, some state level Democrats and state level Republicans have been a bit more bold, but it's easy to be bold when your state is deep blue or deep red, especially if your state, is a state that's a supermajority like mine. Although I really don't know how much longer the supermajority in California is going to last, considering the complete and utter collapse of it. That should be rather interesting to find out. some signs of hope there with recall of 3 school board members in San Francisco and the possible recall of 2 rather corrupt DAs. But we'll see what happens. But anyway, back on topic. Due to these criticisms, Democrats are trying to codify Roe federally, which didn't work exactly through this failed Senate vote. But by the time midterms are over, they'll be even less in a position to be able to do that. Republicans, on the other hand, are, from what I've seen, a bit more divided. Some will try to ban Roe federally, maybe come up with a similar bill that the Democrats did, obviously on the other end of it. But I think many of them, either for strategic or philosophical reasons, will instead opt to focus on the state and local level, which I think, for the time being, is the better approach. Because the practical side of me understands that America is so horrifically divided over the issue that neither a federal ban or codification will make any meaningful difference, because the states are just going to ignore it and do whatever they want. So, but even if the states cooperate with whatever, the federal government says, again, which I doubt's going to happen, because they're just going to use nullification theory to... federal laws will just continue to go back and forth depending on which party controls Congress. And judging by electoral patterns, what tends to happen is, one party controls it for a little while, then another, gets hold of it a few years later. I noticed toward halfway the first term of a new president comes in, their party tends to lose some seats in Congress. Now, sometimes they'll keep control, a majority still, but not always. Like a good example, 1994, the Republicans took control of Congress. That was about halfway through Bill Clinton's first term. They came up with their old contract of America spiel, but they broke almost every single promise they made. Anyway, the vast majority of the American voters have it completely backwards. They pay attention to federal races like Congress or president. And many of them don't vote in midterm elections like the upcoming ones. Well, some states have already had theirs, but mine is, mine's not. It's still waiting on a primary right now. But yet, almost entirely ignore state and local races, even though state and local officials often have an even more profound impact on our daily lives than federal officials, as we really should have learned from these lockdowns for the last couple of years. But another example is the criminal justice issues. If you get arrested, there's a 90% chance your trial will be handled by state and local officials. District attorneys have enormous amounts of discretion. I think they have far too much, if you ask me, to decide which cases to bring to court and which charges the suspect is accused of. And unfortunately, many of them abuse that power and are rarely held accountable for it. But as discouraging as that sounds, the good news is that it's a lot easier to vote out a corrupt state or local official than a corrupt federal official. Now, some states, like my state of California, even have laws allowing for recall of certain state and local officials. And again, I just thought I'd mention those 2 DAs, that they may end up getting recalled in the upcoming primary this June 7th, and I really hope they do. I'm not saying these federal elections aren't important, but it's a lot easier to change things from the bottom up than the top down. And, even though it often takes a bit longer. My main problem with abortion being legal, aside from the obvious, you're killing an unborn child, is that it has contributed to normalizing an act of violence by codifying it as a right. Perhaps, if its legality is no longer guaranteed, even if its illegality is also not guaranteed, and probably won't be for another 50 years or so, if we get that far, if it's able to get that far, that it will make us consider this issue in a more careful, thoughtful manner when we decide who to vote for. Most of these politicians have avoided responsibility for their supposed stances, and it's time to really put them all on record. Most Americans think very little about this issue because it's an uncomfortable one. People don't want to think about it. It's one of the main reasons why abortion's not only legal but mainstream. It's out of sight, out of mind for most people. And Again, despite the fact I don't believe abortion should be legal, I understand that the culture is, in fact, even more important than the law in many cases. That banning it won't make any difference if the culture doesn't change. And I would rather, if I had to choose, I'd rather the culture be changed and it remain legal than the culture not change and it be illegal. I do believe that some pro-choicers are sincere when they say they want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare, but they also need to understand that a disturbing number of people on the left are unapologetically pro-abortion. There's a reason why shout your abortion was a hashtag on Twitter. It was trending. And I'll go into more detail in a separate video on that. Believe me, I went on quite a tangent about that when I was writing the script for this video. And so I'm willing to work with these people to implement policies to reduce abortion, such as reforming the adoption system, just as one example. But it's not only undesirable, but impossible to work with people that want to legalize taxpayer-funded abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy. And yes, that's a more common stance among than you think, than many of you probably thinking it is. But it's unfortunately why it's nearly impossible to have any sort of rational conversation about this issue, and likely will unfortunately remain so for a while. And anyway, stay tuned for part 2 and part 3. Until then, see ya.